Our session today is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce a great speaker, our friend Bailey Fessler from Exactly. Bailey Fessler is Director of Revenue Operations at Exactly, a provider of enterprise-class, cloud-based sales performance management solutions. Before joining Exactly, Bailey worked in sales operations roles at Adobe, Marketo, and Infoblox. Bailey, we're happy to have you with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Terrific. Well, our topic today is integrated sales planning. So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to maybe set the stage a bit about this topic, sales planning, which is broad, often, I think, misunderstood, and vitally important to our audience. So we know a few things about sales planning. We've done some research, and in fact, in today's session, I'm going to share a bit of that research as a way of just providing some basis for the conversation that Bailey and I will have. I really welcome your insights, Bailey, because you have two things that make you qualified for this discussion. One is you work for an organization that provides solutions that help, and for that organization, you're the one doing this work internally, sales planning. Is that?
Yeah, no pressure at all to be doing the job that you sell the solution for.
Sure. So you have compounding responsibilities here. And so we're grateful that you, and we've often found that some of our most interesting sessions come from these kinds of contributors who not only know about solutions, but must use them. So anyway, we appreciate the fact that you're with us today. So let's start with just a little bit of background, just by way of context. I want to share a few things. I want to say that sales organizations that do sales planning effectively outperform their peers. They demonstrate higher overall levels of sales productivity, and their sales organizations are a greater percentage of their sales organizations are successful. That is, the salespeople themselves. More of them are successful. The problem is most firms are not good at sales planning. Many reasons for this we're going to explore today. And if we think about it for a moment, this is not surprising. We don't necessarily equate planning effectiveness with salespeople or even sales leaders. We typically don't hire them to plan. We hire them to do. These are the people that execute. These are not the people that stay in the building and plan, typically. But that is changing. So sales organizations and sales leaders now must balance short-term and long-term objectives. They still have to make the number in the short term, but planning is now an important core competence in sales leadership. So the bottom line is we find very sharp distinctions between planning competent sales organizations and those less capable in planning. We're going to share some of those distinctions today to help you perhaps make a case for investing in sales planning. Okay, let's talk about a few things. First, just to reinforce what I've already communicated, sales planning, effectiveness in sales planning is correlated with sales productivity. We know that firms that are effective in sales planning are more than 4 times as likely to achieve their firm sales objective on an annual basis. And similarly, we know that salespeople within these companies, that is, those that are effective or even somewhat effective in sales planning, are much more likely to achieve their individual salesperson performance objectives. It turns out that there's an extra 25% of the salesperson population on average that makes quota in these firms that are better at planning. And working for a company not effective in sales planning, it seems, is not a good thing. It's a crummy place to work. you're much less likely to be successful. So, any surprises with these numbers?
No, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. You lose a lot of momentum if you're ineffective at sales planning. I just like immediately you're giving me anxiety because I'm thinking about all the lost time or things if you're behind or
Sure.
if
All
things
the
are
people depending on you.
yeah.
I mean, I can understand feeling the pressure because the success of, the entire organization and also, the individual salespeople are connected. So anyway, let's take a step back and ask, what are we sort of talking about sales planning? What specifically is included in your mind, Bailey,
Yeah.
in planning?
Well, when we're talking about sales planning, I think about it as a branch of the annual operating plan. So in my org at Exactly, we're on an offset fiscal year. So our fiscal year ends the end of January. So every year, right around when college football, NFL football comes back, I get excited to draft my fantasy team. And I also know that it is time to start fiscal planning. So we also happen to be private equity owned. So we get a lot of guidance from our private equity firm in terms of what some of our targets are going to look like. I think for public companies, it looks a little different. That way you're getting guidance from the street, you're getting some of your growth targets from the street, and that helps determine what those top level targets are going to look like. And then when it comes to sales planning, that branch of the annual operating plan, you get really specific around, okay, what is the sales org going to look like? How are we going to achieve that top level target that we're getting in terms of like our ARR, our annual recurring revenue, our gross revenue retention, net revenue retention? So if these are my top level targets, how are we going to achieve that in terms of like territory quota management, sales capacity and headcount? And then which mix of people are going to achieve that, and then how am I potentially going to change my go-to-market strategy to achieve those things? What change management needs to happen to do that? Or is my go-to-market strategy going pretty well and it's a headcount thing? Or what has been going well this year that we maybe need to change to next year? And it looks a little bit different every year. Like, is it going to be a year where we have big changes to make? Or is it a year where we are maybe expanding into a new region? It's always interesting.
Indeed, this is well described. Like, you've captured the gist of sales planning. It starts with, as you point out, sort of how much from on high you get this number, and then you have to figure out, well, how do you operationalize it? Exactly what are we going to do to make that number? And that includes this range of resource allocation decisions, like how many people, where, doing what, and also goal allocation decisions. We have to figure out, how to assign accountability and responsibility for making that number. So there are a sequence of things that sales organizations do. Let me enumerate some of them in a little bit more detail. Again, based on some research that we've done, I want to point out some disciplines that we included in the research, and I can also, using this data, share how companies rated the importance of these various things. So the percentages that you see to the right are the percentage of companies that said this planning discipline, sub-planning discipline, if you will, is important to our sales organization's ability to be successful. So the greatest percentage of firms indicated that planning related to sales incentive compensation is important. 88% said that was important. It makes sense given it's almost always the single largest investment we make in sales. It's the bulk of the expense associated with selling costs. Then came goal setting and allocation. Also, very likely to be considered important is sales organization structure, including channel design, sales-related strategy, territories and salesperson assignments, headcount and capacity, and forecasting. So lots of stuff in this list. And down at the bottom comes budgeting, so where we're looking at how much will we spend on training and technology.
Yeah. And I'm not surprised to see sales incentive compensation at the top, especially as an ops practitioner. That's one where if you're not closely partnered with your FP&A org, if you're not closely looking at data and looking at the investment to make there, if you get something wrong in the design of your plans, like that's one that can get you fired. That's a risky category.
Yes, and engender lots of animosity as well. Not just fired, but run out of town, because if you screw up that comp plan, you're going to ruin the year for like everyone.
If you burn through the budget, or like
right.
If you've made something so unachievable that none of your sales people are earning, then you've also created an attrition problem. It's like you have to manage both sides of that.
Yes. So this is quite interesting, and the challenge is apparent why it's so difficult to be effective in sales planning. Let's spend a moment and just point out when it relates to effectiveness. We asked firms in this study, and in this particular study, there were 73 large B2B firms. We asked them to self-assess their sales planning effectiveness. And only 40% said that they, in fact, were effective in sales planning. So I guess this begs the question, why? What is it that makes this so difficult?
Well, you also have a day job.
Right.
On top of the exercise, when you get this massive, you're coming up for most people when they start planning the back 75% of your fiscal year, when you're typically the heaviest, of your pipeline, you're closing the most deals, and then you're tasked with this big project that you also have to execute on that's largely cross-functional and having to work with a lot of teams and involves a lot of data, a lot of scenarios, a lot of modeling. It's not easy to do.
We also know that things change too. So everything you've said describes a very challenging environment, but then layer on top of that the fact that the goalpost might be moving in any given quarter or year with new products or market
acquisitions.
Dynamics. Yeah. So we'll take a little deeper look at this effectiveness data. We'll start with this slide I've already shown, which rates the importance of all these sub-planning disciplines. And then we also can say what percentage of firms are effective in each of these. So as you can see, firms are least likely to be effective when it comes to budgeting for training and technology, though that is also considered least likely to be important. Among all of the others, of which at least 70% of firms say are important, the planning disciplines that appear to be most challenging are estimating sales headcount and capacity, and goal setting and allocation, followed pretty closely by sales incentive compensation and sales strategy. I suppose we should point out these things are kind of connected up, right?
Yes, very much so.
You can't pick one to be good at. Like you couldn't be, you couldn't just be good at sales incentive comp without being good at these others, because it's such an integrative discipline. All these things connected.
Totally.
Well, as you point out, there are plenty of reasons why this is challenging. In our research, we drilled into a couple. In some ways, they're the most obvious, or at least the most recognizable, probably, among people who do this work. But I want to share them with you because I think most people will find these interesting when it comes to identifying what makes sales planning difficult. So the first of these two things is that it arrives too late. That is, our finished planning is completed too late. Just somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of firms say that they complete planning on time. Some, in fact, complete planning early, also great. But many firms complete these various elements of sales planning too late. For example, if we look at the most important things, more than half, 51% of firms complete. See if I can highlight here their efforts to determine goal setting and allocation. That comes too late for more than half of firms, and an approximate equal number are late with incentive compensation related planning. So, we know this isn't optimal, but can we talk a little bit about why it's bad to be late with these things?
Yeah, if you think about if I think about our, average sales cycle times, again, it gives me anxiety, average sales cycle times for opportunities. And if we're late on incentive comp into a new fiscal year, I think about getting everybody together at sales kickoff at the beginning of a fiscal year. And if you don't have new comp plans in front of your field organization, kind of within that week, within that month, you have people kind of flying blind, without their targets, without their quotas, without what they're going to be measured on. So what are they motivated to do?
Yeah. It's very it's also quite distracting. People, that's so important to individual salespeople. So, quite the problem. Now, in our research, we correlated timeliness of planning with success. That is, timeliness of planning in these individual elements with overall sales planning success. And this is an interesting outcome. I want to share these data as well. So we find that companies that are early planners are much more effective overall in their sales planning. So the vertical axis here is the percentage of firms that say their overall planning efforts are effective. And this first line charts those that small minority of firms that indicate they're early in their planning efforts. So between 50% and 89% of these firms are effective overall in sales planning. And here are those firms that say they are on time with planning. So again, a greater percentage of these firms are effective than all firms as a whole. And what's interesting is we can look at the delta between these various planning disciplines and calculate the premium or the advantage that accrues to these firms for being early. In fact, we can also do that by looking at firms that are too late in planning. And so these deltas are really profound when it comes to strategy. It's hard to come up with strategy late. It has to precede what people are actually doing, but also substantial delta here with goal setting and allocation, and really across the board, there are substantial advantages to be had for planning early, or at least not planning late. Similarly, when it comes to the firms that plan too little, we've already seen this slide. Let's get this guy out. We have a similar relationship between, I'm sorry, this is the amount of planning done. And similarly, we have firms that say they plan too much, and we have firms that say they plan just the right amount. And we have firms that plan too little. So similar gaps here between the amount of planning done and the overall effectiveness in planning. Those gaps are most substantial when it comes to sales organization structure, channel design, but they're quite significant for sales strategy, territories, headcount, really across the board, with one interesting exception related to forecasting. It turns out that companies that do too much forecasting are less effective than companies that do less forecasting.
That's interesting.
Yeah, what do you think's going on there?
Maybe some analysis paralysis.
I think so too. I think, if you forecast enough, you won't sell anything. So that might be what we're seeing there. So anyway, two somewhat obvious, at least clear issues related to why sales planning is challenging. On the other hand, these two things may be among the most readily fixed. Let's think for a minute objectively why these companies don't do enough planning and don't do it on time. What would you say? How would you answer that question, Bailey?
Yeah, if they're not doing enough and not doing it on time, not doing enough, I think about planning challenges we had like before technology and solutions were available. If you're doing planning in a spreadsheet, you're limited in maybe sort of the amount of scenarios you can run or amount of options there are available to you, or maybe the time or bandwidth constraints that are kind of placed on you in those scenarios. It takes a lot more effort to put sort of those headcount scenarios through those models, the bigger your team or your organization gets, if you're kind of in a spreadsheet sort of scenario.
You have to take shortcuts and make assumptions I guess. And I wonder though, do you think that planning is insufficiently prioritized in many organizations? The companies in these studies, they range between 70 and 80 firms, and they're serious companies. They're not small or terribly under-resourced companies. I'm just curious if you think, I know it's not the case in your place. You guys believe in sales planning.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if that's not true in many of these firms.
I think it can be. I think people can also get stuck in patterns of like, well, this is what we've been doing. This is our go-to-market motion. And if you don't have someone challenging the status quo, you can get stuck in some of those patterns of sort of rinse and repeating. This is our org. That, like, why would we change it? Because that's sort of the challenging, at least for the option, the very challenging part of sales planning is, okay, I finally got my CRO, CFO, and CEO to agree to next year's plan. Now I have to carry out with my CRO's sales leaders the change management and the impact of that plan. Like if we're introducing new roles in the sales organization or a fully new comp plan with new elements and new design in it, now I'm the one who has to carry out the change management and look in the forecast to see if I'm seeing the pipeline I expected, and some of those leading indicators and KPIs that we were hoping to see, we hypothesized we would see when we developed the plan. And if I'm not sending those signals back to leadership of like, we're seeing unintended consequences of the plan, then I'm not doing my job.
Yeah, and these are big changes that you're talking about.
And sometimes orgs don't have the capacity to, like, ops orgs are running really lean right now. Sometimes they don't have the capacity to take on some of those bigger changes.
Indeed. Well, I'll remind our audience that we welcome your questions and comments. You can easiest way to submit them is clicking through on the little text link in the top right that says View Chat, and we'll leave a little bit of time for those. Okay, so let's talk about hallmarks of effective planning. So we've pointed out, how companies aren't so good at this, and also why that might be true. Let's talk now about what characterizes the companies that are in fact effective in sales planning. Again, I want to share a few slides here. I want to start by showing specific capabilities. These are, I guess, capabilities that result from effective sales planning. They include the ability to do scenario planning, that is to project outcomes for a proposed change. For example, we're going to change the comp plan, pay rates. What does that do to productivity and expense? Another is the ability to collaborate across functions in the organization, the ability to communicate changes, the effectiveness in prioritizing, participating in these planning efforts by participants and stakeholders, using enabling technology, having an efficient planning process, having management that knows how to plan, capable management, and then having accurate data. Now, firms that are successful individually in these things are likely to be effective overall in their sales planning effort. So, for example, firms that are effective in doing the scenario planning, 75% of those firms say that they are effective overall in sales planning. We also know, we'll show here the firms that are not effective in these things. And so each of these might be considered a marker of effectiveness. Some have a more stark difference in the impact of effectiveness in any one capability. Look, for example, at that element prioritized by participants. That is, people who are doing the planning consider it important. When that's not the case, you're roughly 7 times less likely to have effective planning. So perhaps one of those things overlooked when we think about all the elements we have to get right is simply having people prioritizing and taking planning seriously is vitally important, as we see. So many other gaps on here, and I'll show one more slide in this similar vein. Let's see. So this shows some specific planning outcomes. These are things we included in the research that we think most firms want to see in their sales planning. It includes accurate estimates of customer potential, being able to fully allocate goals to the sales organization, being able to consistently assign workload. So again, allocating workload consistent and in a balanced fashion across salespeople. Projecting sales compensation expense, similar to the scenario planning, but this specific to sales comp. Creating fair quotas, equitably distributing opportunity, and considering long-range sales organization issues. Now, with these outcomes, we look not at their impact on overall planning effectiveness, but on overall firm sales productivity. So this vertical axis relates to the percentage of firms making their number on an annual basis. And we can see that these outcomes do correlate with firm success in the sales organization. And then let's contrast them with firms that are not successful in these specific outcomes. They don't achieve these outcomes. So if you're not able to estimate potential, you're only 31% of those firms met the firm sales objective in the preceding 12 months. That gap narrows a bit with some of these other things, for example, assigning workload or distributing potential. But there are substantial gaps that say, you've got to get this right. In fact, if you get it right, your chances of being effective as a firm are multiplied by a factor of 2 to 3x. So that's a fairly rich premium for achieving these outcomes. So I don't know if this closes the gap for many firms, but it does begin to paint a picture of why you'd want to invest in the ability to achieve these things, because tremendous advantage accrues to firms that can do them.
Definitely.
So, we looked at all these planning capabilities and we plotted them. As you recall from an earlier slide, we asked about importance and we asked about firm effectiveness in these things. So we have a way of showing those two elements: effectiveness here on the x-axis and importance on the y. Actually, I got that wrong, didn't I? Importance is on the left. Anyway, what we really want to know are which of these things are among the most important things in the estimation of firms, and among the things that they are least likely to be effective in. And there were three things that stood out. You just take all of the data in aggregate. This is a composite of all firms. There were three things that we can say represent perhaps the most important improvement opportunities when it comes to sales planning. Those three things: goal setting and allocation, sales incentive compensation, and the planning associated with sales comp, and thirdly, sales strategy, planning related to sales strategy. Any surprises there for you?
No, because those are some of the hardest ones to do, and they all three kind of go together. And if you're a lot of times, if you're not using a piece of software to help sort of join those things, it can be really hard to cross-functionally merge those things. So kind of depending in which department your incentive comp team sits. I've sat in organizations where incentive comp is sat in finance, and during the planning process, they sort of get inputs later. I've been in organizations where incentive comp is with RevOps, and we work collaboratively with FP&A with sort of the expense envelope and work together on some of the goal setting and design and strategy, and like get really real about, this is our average sales cycle, this is our average bookings amount, like what do we want to try to influence next year in our plan, what products are we trying to drive in our outcomes, how can we modify and model that. But it does take a lot of cross-functional collaboration, like you said, a lot of commitment to the planning effort as kind of a program being run in your organization. And then maybe the hardest part that people don't really talk about, or is the quiet part that I'm going to say out loud, is getting your executives aligned and committed to it. Because at the mid-manager level, kind of where I sit, you can be aligned, but getting your C-suite aligned and signed off on it can be a very challenging part as like an ops practitioner in managing up.
And this is just a matter of pointing out the long-term benefit or even the midterm benefit of having a solid sales plan to an executive who's frazzled trying to get something in that week, that quarter. Right? Is that what we're talking about? Just elevating the priority?
Totally. Elevating the priority, or helping them understand the different paths you can go down, or the different impacts of the different plans of like, hey, if we go plan A, these are the three key components of how we've structured this one. Or here's plan B that has us investing more in our EMEA region and mid-market in North America, or we've mocked it up this way with your feedback here. But it's getting like all of them aligned and signed off on it, because you can stay spinning wheels and cycles and tweaks.
We know one thing that can make a big difference is technology. I want to talk a little bit about that and just ask you maybe to share with us insights on how technology can help do some of the things we're talking about, make planning more efficient, for example.
That scenario modeling, because I'm sure other people on this call feel the same way, being able to do that scenario modeling real time while you have your audience on a call with you is invaluable. I'm sure everybody's lived it before, when you go offline, when you get that feedback, and then having to kind of come back to your stakeholder group or your steering committee to get sign off. Anytime I can eliminate those cycles via leveraging technology to show those scenarios, to show the different territory quota allocations and sales org design, that helps me save time. That helps the execs and leadership feel more confident in what we're building, because they've looked at different options. So they can feel more confident that we are going with the best option, the option that's going to lead us to the most optimal success, because we've been able to run more scenarios and explore more options. Because I think that's honestly like a resource constraint if you don't have technology or software to help in your planning process. Like we were talking about before, you're kind of confined to however much you can get through a spreadsheet process versus, maybe an AI-driven piece of software helping you optimize your plan from that headcount allocation through to incentive design.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, let's we can stop now. I think that's all we had to present. I have a few summary slides. I'll say this at the end, but I just want to invite comment or questions from our audience. You may submit those now. We have a couple in the queue, and we'll get to those. And happy to take yours. I'll do my best to make sure I'm checking email as well. And so I see that we have a couple in email. So anyway, get those questions in. And if you're willing to answer some questions, Bailey, I'll start firing them at you.
Sure.
I will be willing to take the easy questions myself.
You're going to pass me the hard ones?
Yes, I'm going to give you the really hard ones, the impossible ones.
Sounds
to you. In fact, I'll find them all impossible, so I'll let you take first crack. So let's see. We have a question about technology. What's the single most important impact that technology has usually when implemented for sales planning?
I think it's the ability to save, like for me, when we've leveraged technology in our planning process, it's having those scenarios saved so that when my scenario, like my CRO, for example, if Sam ever watches this, love you to death, but he'll pivot back to something we talked about like 45 days ago. And if we're in a spreadsheet, like it makes it so much harder for me to go back. It's the version controlling in software where I can go back because he'll have a conversation with somebody and he'll want something from like a month ago. And software allows me to have that version controlling, and I can pivot back to a point in time or a scenario we had from that meeting that he suddenly wants to pivot back to.
Yeah. So I mean, when I did this work, those spreadsheets went crazy. I mean, and they had all these adventures, and so it would be impossible to rewind that.
Yeah. Even with like some of the stuff in Google Sheets that you can do and get back to, it still is very challenging.
Yeah, I get it for sure. Okay, here's a question. Who should do sales planning?
Well, as
I think the question here is like, what function should do it? Your title is revenue operations, right?
Yes. So yeah, at exactly. I mean, I would say my team sort of quarterbacks the effort. Like I would think of it as like we sort of program manage sales planning, but like the annual operating plan is being driven out of the office of the CFO. So we're partnering very closely with like our FP&A counterparts on the sales planning efforts, making sure we're tying off in terms of what are the targets and working very closely with them. And like we have a pretty buttoned up, like I use like project management terminology like throughout it in terms of like getting sign off and steering committee sort of things, so that if ever anybody has a question, I was like, no, here's where we got approval or stuff. But I tend to have our department program managing.
A question of my own, which is, do you ask your salespeople for input as part of some of the planning?
Sales leaders or sales individual contributors?
Yeah, salespeople. So, hey, what are you going to sell next year? We haven't touched on this, but navigating that as an input and the bias that is sometimes part of those, what you learn.
Yeah, I would say we definitely get like solicit feedback from them on like what went well, what's going well in our systems, what do you think went well, like in some of how we approached the go-to-market this year, or like our target account strategies or the ideal customer profile, but sort of cautious in terms of getting feedback from them in terms of like their quotas or things like that.
Sure. Yeah, of course you wouldn't ask, say, what do you think your quota should be next year?
Yeah.
But you're kind of asking that when you say, what's in your pipeline, what do you expect to do, especially when it comes to like major accounts, people are looking forward, but they realize, they have self-interest, and so this is always tricky. I'm always curious how we balance those projections with, maybe more objective measures.
Yeah. And we usually try to reassure them, like we usually have a pretty fair like holdover policy as new territories roll out, so that if like we want them to continue generating pipeline through the end of the fiscal year. So anything they generate, they'll get to hold on to for a period of time going on into the new fiscal year if it isn't a part of their territory in
Uh,
the year.
Got it. Okay, let's do one more question. Can you talk about the impact of AI on planning?
I am so excited to get to do more of that in our planning this year. Um, because a lot of it is so new. So I'm just excited to, like, frankly, use it more in planning this year and see what kind of insights from the data we can get out of it. Because I feel like, as a practitioner now, being at Exactly for 3 years, I feel like so much I have a cognitive bias, I'm sure, towards our data. The AI doesn't. I'm excited to see what kind of insights we can glean from that or what blind spots I might have.
Sure. Well, how do you expect to be using it? Have you gotten your hands on it yet?
We have some AI capabilities in our own software that we're leveraging internally. We're actually, like going through an implementation internally, upgrading some of our own systems in our internal instance. So I'm excited to get my hands on that and leverage it in our internal planning cycle this year. And I expect to, use it throughout our territory quota planning and like get exactly that sort of feedback and removing like my own biases and getting feedback on our data.
Yeah, and the speed at which it's able to provide um, those answers is amazing too. So I share your excitement and interest in seeing what the future holds with AI. Okay, so let's go to some summary observations.
Yeah.
I'll give you a chance to have the last word, but in the meantime, I will just march us through a few ideas that we sort of covered off on that were resulting from the research that we've done on this topic of sales planning. Those observations are as follows. First of all, sales organizations think planning is important, but they're not very good at it. Nevertheless, those that are enjoy huge performance advantages. They are 4 times more likely to achieve the firm sales objective. And within those organizations, a substantial additional amount of salespeople make quota compared to organizations that are not good at sales planning. It's about an extra 25% of the sales force. Also, we know early planners are more effective in sales planning disciplines, but that is to put more precisely, those companies that are planning early enjoy premium in effectiveness in overall sales planning. And this is especially true when it comes to setting and allocating goals, salesperson quotas. So if you're late with that, there's a substantial penalty to pay. Some additional ideas. In general, late planning really undermines overall planning effectiveness. Also, maybe let's point out that sales organizations may be poor judges of just how much planning effort is required. So as a way of substantiating that assertion, I would point out that those firms that say they do too much planning still have much better outcomes than those that say they do the right amount, and certainly much better outcomes than those that do too little. Now, there's one interesting exception. That's forecasting. It's possible to forecast too much. And yeah, maybe that's a function of just the drain on selling capacity. You're pestering everyone for a bunch of inputs related to forecasting. Okay, so there are some specific outcomes in planning that correlate with meaningful jumps in sales productivity. That is the likelihood of making the firm sales goal in any given year. Those things are being able to accurately estimate potential in the marketplace and within customers, the ability to regularly review and incorporate long-term strategic issues. And as I recall from this research, what we defined as long-term was a 3-year horizon. So this is really just kind of second ridgeline planning horizons. This isn't super, futuristic stuff. Thirdly, the ability to evaluate potential sales comp changes in advance and project their impact in pay and in performance. That also relates to a big jump in likely productivity and being able to equitably allocate salesperson goals. These are the things we think matter most. All of these things, all of the capabilities that we outlined matter and play a role in helping the organization to be productive. So I want to thank you for your insight. Before I let you go, I'll give you the opportunity to have the last word on this important topic, Bailey.
I would just say, when you're thinking about sales comp, don't forget about your supporting roles. It's fun to, drive incentives for your solutions consultants and your SDRs too. Getting creative with those plans is always fun.
Yeah, that's an important thing to point out. I mean, there are so many other important plans besides just those core sellers. All right. Well, thank you very much, Bailey Fessler from Exactly. Really appreciate your help with this topic. And thank you for a great conversation today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Great. And I'll point out before I let everyone go that our next Sales Management Association webcast is October 23rd. On that date, we will present a webcast on AI's new role in sales performance management. You can learn more about this event and many other events coming up while you're here on our site under the Events tab. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks again for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.